German History Part 3. It's also, you know that Germany is very near France, and it's very near of other countries as well. So don't be surprised to see German history, even though the last Merovingian king was a king of the Franks. Alright? I will put the link in the video description. I've made the research and this is the result that I reached. At the death Clovis I in 511, his realm was divided among his 4 sons, Childeric I, Clodimir, Childebert I, and Clotaire I. Despite the frequently bloody competition between the brothers, they managed among them to extend Frankish rule. See, Frankish rule over Thuringia in approximately 531 and Burgundy in 534, and to gain sway over, if not possession of, Septimania on the Mediterranean coast, Bavaria, and the lands of the Saxons to the north. By 558, Clotaire I was the last surviving son of Clovis I, and until his death in 561, the Frankish realm was once again united. In 561, the realm was again divided between brothers, Charibert I, Guntram, Sigebert, and Chilperic I, and again family strife and intrigue ensued, particularly between Chilperic and his wife Fredegund in the northwest of Gaul, and Sigebert and his wife Brunhild in the northeast. Dynamic struggles and increasing pressures exerted on the realm by neighboring peoples, Bretons and Gascons in the west, Lombards in the southeast, Avars in the east, prompted a reorganization of the Frankish kingdoms. Several eastern regions. Just a quick comment when I mentioned that the last king of the Merovingian was Frank. We also need to understand that France did not exist at that time, so I would say that Germany was not existing at this time either, but we understand, geographically speaking, France and Germany is very near, so I understand why this person proclaimed German History Part 3, because, you know, we don't have to split the hair in 4. The human race is a big family, but unfortunately we like to be divided and it's really not helping us. Anyways, I'm going to continue. Several eastern regions were merged into the kingdom of Austrasia, with its capital at Metz. In the west, Neustria emerged, with its capital first at Soissons and later at Paris. To the south was the enlarged kingdom of Burgundy, with its capital at Chalon-sur-Saône. Overall Frankish unity was again achieved in 613 when Clotaire II, son of Chilperic I and king of Neustria, inherited the other 2 kingdoms as well. On the death of Clotaire's son Dagobert I in 639, the realm was divided yet again But by that time the kings of the two regions, Neustria and Burgundy on the one hand, and Austrasia on the other, had been forced to yield much of their power to household officials known as mayors of the palace. Under the Merovingian dynasty, the mayor of the palace was the manager of the household of the Frankish king. The office existed from the 6th century, and during the 7th it evolved into the power behind the throne, between commas, in the northeastern kingdom of Austrasia. The mayor of the palace held and withheld the real and effective power to make decisions affecting the kingdom, while the kings had been reduced to performing merely ceremonial functions, which made them little more than figureheads. The office may be compared to that of a prime minister, all of which have similarly been the real powers behind some ceremonial monarchs. In Austrasia, the mayoral office became hereditary in the family of the Pepinids. In 687, after victory over the western kingdom of Neustria, the Austrasian mayor Pepin of Herstal took the title Duke of the Franks to signify his augmented role. Charles Martel, from 688 to October 22, 741, was a son of the Frankish statesman Pepin of Herstal and Pepin's mistress, a noblewoman named Alpaida. As Duke and Prince of the Franks and Mayor of the Palace, Charles Martel was the de facto ruler of Francia from 718 until his death. Charles successfully asserted his claims to power as successor to his father, as the power behind the throne in Frankish politics, continuing and building on his father's work. He restored centralized government in Francia and began the series of military campaigns that reestablished the Franks as the undisputed masters of all Gaul. Much attention has been paid to his success in defeating an Arab raid in Aquitaine at the Battle of Tours. Alongside his military endeavors, Charles has been traditionally credited with a seminal role in the development of the Frankish system of feudalism. Charles Martel ceased bothering with the facade of a king at the last 4 years of his reign, 743 to 747, were an interregnum. The Carolingian dynasty takes its name from Carolus, the Latinized name of Charles Martel. The name Carolingian, between commas, medieval Latin Carolingi, an alternate form of an unattested Old High German word Carlin or Kerling, meaning descendant of Charles, or the family of Charles. Pepin III of the Short, 714 to September 768, was the younger son of Charles Martel and his wife Rotrud. Pepin's upbringing was distinguished by the ecclesiastical education he had received from the monks of Saint Denis. Succeeding his father and the mayor of the palace in 741, Pepin reigned over Francia jointly with his elder brother Carloman. Pepin ruled in Neustria, Burgundy, and Provence, while his older brother Carloman established himself in Austrasia, Alemannia, and Thuringia. The brothers were active in suppressing revolts led by the Bavarians, Aquitanian Saxons, and the Alemanni in the early years of their reign. In 743, they ended the Frankish interregnum by choosing Childeric III, who was to be the last Merovingian monarch as figurehead king of the Franks. Being well disposed towards the church and papacy on account of their ecclesiastical upbringing, Pepin and Carloman continued their father's work in supporting Saint Boniface in reforming the Frankish church and evangelizing the Saxons. After Carloman, who was an intensely pious man, retired to religious life in 747, Pepin became the sole ruler of the Franks. He suppressed a revolt led by his half-brother Grifo and succeeded in becoming the undisputed master of all Francia. Giving up pretense, Pepin then forced Childeric into a monastery and had himself proclaimed king of the Franks with support of Pope Zachary in 751. The decision was not supported by all members of the Carolingian family, and Pepin had to put down a revolt led by Carloman's son, Drogo, and again by Grifo. By the way, I will add that the fact that you see Childeric III died just a few years later, had to have his hair being cut. You know the story of the Merovingian kings. They were letting their hair and beard grow because they thought they had power, just like if you think of Samson, you know, they thought that letting grow their hair and their beard, it was giving them power. So I'm not saying, as a matter of fact, that this is what happened to Childeric III, but what I will say for sure is emotionally, I believe Childeric III was being crushed by having his hair being cut, because he died a few years later and he was a very young adult. So
this suffering, this misery, it made me so angry and so helpless. Everyone's just talking, but no one's doing anything. Father is always complaining. Someone just has to do something! Oh, Lord! Lord, forgive me, I swore I spoke your name in vain.
You must begin. You must begin and go to the king.
Me? That's insane. I can't leave home.
You can't stay here any longer. You must begin and go to the king.
No, leave me alone. I'm not listening to you.
Trust us. Trust in God, little one.
I'm only a lowly farm girl. I've never held a sword before. I can't lead a war. I can't even fight.
God has chosen you to help the king. God wants you to liberate France. Liberate Orléans, and you will see that it is true. Trust in God, and everyone will believe in you.
Where shall I go? Tell me now!
Go to Vaucouleur. Go to the commander. He will give you to the ones who will lead you to the king.
Shall I tell Father? No, I'll just go. Tomorrow?
Where is that wretched girl?
I had considered everything for long enough. Now, my new life was about to begin. Time was limited.
Quelques milliers dans un grand pré, juste des pierres dessus la terre. Ils ont payé pour leur fierté. Tous ces Saxons qui ont dit non, Verden, Verden. Et cette croix qu'ils ont mis là pour vous garder, vous humilier. On n'est pas prêt de l'oublier. Guerrier vaincu par le zénu, c'était pas dur, un petit parjure, rien qu'une fois dire je crois. Mais se mettre à genoux, c'était plus fort que vous, Verden, Verden. Et cette croix qu'ils ont mis là pour vous garder, vous humilier. On n'est pas prêt de l'oublier. Une fois tous tués, qu'est-ce qui restait? Vos terres données à des curés et vos enfants en communion, les dieux se noyant dans votre sang. Verden, Verden. Et cette croix qu'ils ont mis là pour vous garder, vous humilier. On n'est pas prêt de l'oublier. 1000 ans après, si vous saviez, il y a quelques fous qui pensent à vous, qui pourraient les regarder crever. Mais vos pieds réveillent notre colère. Verden, Verden. Et cette croix qu'ils ont mis là pour vous garder, vous humilier. On n'est pas prêt de l'oublier. Verden, Verden. Car cette croix qu'ils ont mis là, on en fera du petit bois. Car pardonnez, nous, on connaît pas.
Joan d'Arc and a fear of the fairy faith. After considering Iron Age forts and the landscape local to where I lived last week, I'm going to come leaping forward in time and bustling off over the channel to consider Joan of Arc for the letter J. Why? Because I've always loved the tale of Joan of Arc. But it's more than that. Joan is a very real historical character. A peasant girl from rural France, an area steeped in Celtic history and tradition, who struck the fear of God into English forces and claimed the throne of France for the Dauphin. For me, she is the epitome of Celtic womanhood. Fierce, a warrior in touch with greater powers, liminal and beautiful. Strong, direct and afraid of nothing. Greater powers? Voices she heard from a very early age. It was in listening to the voices that Joan disguised herself a man in 1429, traveled across country to the royal court at Chinon, and declared herself general of the Dauphin, Charles. The Dauphin and his advisors thought her strange, but decided to support Joan's claim for propaganda value. To their surprise, Joan proved an excellent military strategist with a quick grasp of warfare. At the head of her army, Joan stormed the siege of Orleans in April 1429 and defeated the English lines, lifting the siege and earning herself the moniker Maid of Orleans. She went on to win French generals to her side, and victories followed at Jargeau, Meung-sur-Loire, and Beaugency as the English were driven out of the Loire Valley. At this point the French might have stopped, but it was Joan who persuaded the French to pursue the English. Drawing of Joan of Arc by Clement de Fauquemberg. On the 18th of June 1429, they defeated the enemy soundly at the Battle of Patay, an engagement that might be compared to Agincourt in reverse. At Patay, 1,500 French knights took on an English force of 5,000. There were 100 French casualties compared to the loss of 2,500 English. Within a year of coming to the Dauphin, Auxerre and Troyes surrendered bloodlessly and Reims opened its gates to Charles. The Dauphin was crowned Charles VII in December 1429, while Joan and her family were ennobled as a reward. A Celtic hero. A girl who heard the voices of saints. Or fairies? In May 1430, 5 months after Charles VII is crowned, Joan is ambushed, captured at Compiègne by Burgundian forces allied to the English. She is moved to the English HQ at Rouen, and despite several efforts by Armagnac forces to save Joan, a trial begins in January 1431. Furries? It is a real accusation leveled by Joan's inquisitors, an accusation that shows how strong the belief of witchcraft, the Celtic otherworld and fae still were in society. Indeed, the fear shows real and ugly in her trial, in her subsequent execution, and in what the English do to the remains of a young girl. No one can rightly claim to know where the voices Joan heard came from, or who they were. All that we can be certain of is Joan never wavers in her claim that the voices were of saints and angels. In a politically motivated trial, the English aim to be rid of an unusual prisoner of war, and at the same time maximize humiliation of the enemy. They will prove Joan a fraud. It doesn't work. Joan refuses to deny the voices and her answers to ecclesiastical questions, designed to trap and ensnare, prove intelligent, astute and indeed remarkable. Regardless, she is accused of witchcraft, heresy, is asked what knowledge she has of the fairy faith, and ultimately found guilty. This guilt is based largely on the use of male clothing and hairstyle, given Joan's ability to counter their questions. On the 30th of May 1431, Joan is tied to a stone pillar in Rouen. At just 19 or 20 years old, with a cross of wood tied to her dress, she is burnt at the stake. After she is dead, the coals are raked back by the English to expose the charred remains so that none might claim she escaped. Then, what's left is burned twice more by the English at great heat. Her final remains, being mainly ash, are collected and thrown into the Seine to prevent anyone collecting them. Even in death, Joan bred fear in her enemy. Her executioner, Geoffroy Therage, later claimed he greatly feared to be damned. Joan of Arc, François Chiflard. Whether blessed by God and his saints, or in touch with the gods of the other world, Joan was truly a remarkable woman and general. To the point of death she never faltered in seeing the voices she heard as being those of the saints. Many studies have since considered her sanity. None have found the diverse characteristics needed to prove a psychological disorder. Indeed, Joan d'Arc's trial is considered so unfair its transcripts were later used to prove her innocence and canonize her in the 20th century. A remarkable woman. Now, in more recent times, Joan is increasingly seen as an embodiment of an ancient Celtic image of womanhood. She's a warrior, a Celtic identity submerged for centuries, since the coming of Rome and Christianity to Celtic lands. I love this image. I for one like to picture Jeanne d'Arc as a Celtic warrior, but at the same time accept her assertion of the voices being saintly. And of the Fae? I choose to believe in those too. By Paul Jameson, March 2018.
That Sigebert did survive his father's murder, did adopt the family name of Plantard and, as Count of Rhazes, did perpetuate his father's lineage. Prince Ursus. By 886, of course, the flowering shoot of the Merovingian vine had blossomed into a large and complicated family tree. Bernard Plantavello and the Dukes of Aquitaine constitute one branch. There were other branches as well. Thus the prior documents declare that Sigebert IV's grandson, Sigebert VI, was known by the name of Prince Ursus. Between 877 and 879 Prince Ursus is said to have been officially proclaimed King Ursus. Aided by two nobles Bernard d'Auvergne and the Marquis of Gothy, he is said to have undertaken an insurrection against Louis II of France in an attempt to regain his rightful heritage. Independent historians confirm that such an insurrection did indeed occur between 877 and 879. These same historians refer to Bernard d'Auvergne and the Marquis of Gothy. The leader, or instigator, of the insurrection is not specifically named as Sigebert VI. But there are references to an individual known as Prince Ursus. Moreover, Prince Ursus is known to have been involved in a curious and elaborate ceremony in Nîmes, at which 500 assembled ecclesiastics chanted the Te Deum. From all accounts of it, this ceremony would seem to have been a coronation. It may well have been the coronation to which the prior documents alluded the proclamation of Prince Ursus as king. Once again, the prior documents received independent support. Once again, they seemed to draw on information unobtainable elsewhere, information which supplemented and sometimes even helped explain caesuras in accepted history. In this case, they had apparently told us who the elusive Prince Ursus actually was, the lineal descendant, through Sigebert IV, of the murdered Dagobert II. And the insurrection, of which historians had hitherto made no sense, could now be seen as a perfectly comprehensible attempt by the deposed Merovingian dynasty to regain its heritage, the heritage conferred upon it by Rome through the pact with Clovis, and then subsequently betrayed. According to both the prior documents and independent sources, the insurrection failed, Prince Ursus and his supporters being defeated at a battle near Poitiers in 881. With this setback, the Plantard family is said to have lost its possessions in the south of France, although it still clung to the now purely titular status of Duke of Rhédi and Count of Rhazes. Prince Ursus is said to have died in Brittany, while his line became allied by marriage with the Breton ducal house. By the late 9th century, then, the Merovingian blood had flowed into the duchies of both Brittany and Aquitaine. In the years that followed, the family, including Alain, later Duke of Brittany, is said to have sought refuge in England, establishing an English branch called Planta. Independent authorities again confirm that Alain, his family and entourage, fled from the Vikings to England. According to the prior documents, one of the English branch of the family, listed as Vere VI, was nicknamed the Architect.